Today we're going to talk about General Motors direct injection failures and some of the common engines across many different brands and models that it is used on. Let's get started. Today we're using this 2012 Buick Verona as an example. The car itself it's kind of middle of the road. It's not a bad car, it's not a great car, it's okay. But the 2.4 engine can have a lot of issues as they get miles racked up on. We're going to show you the problems we found with this car and how this problem can relate to a lot of you out there with multiple different models of cars that use this engine. So what kind of cars have this Ecotec 2.4 engine? And there's a lot of them. They're roughly in the 2010 to 2015 range. Some are maybe a little earlier, a little later, but pretty much in that range. The list was so long, I had to write it down on paper so you guys could, I want to make sure I get it across to you. These models here use this engine. The Pontiac G5, the Chevy Cobalt, the Saturn Ion, Pontiac Solstice, Saturn Sky, Chevy HHR, Saturn Aura, Chevy Captiva, Chevy Malibu, Chevy Impala, Chevy Equinox, Buick LaCrosse, Buick Regal, Buick Verona, like this Verona here. Lots of models of cars. Let's take a look around this thing before we dive into it. I'll show you what we found that was wrong and how when I looked it up on our database called Identifix, I saw this is a massive problem across all of those models. Let's take a look around this car. So here's the front of this Verona. You can see the headlights are already starting to fog over, being a 2012 model year. As we go around to the side, you can see it's not been wrecked or beat up or anything. It's in decent condition. It has some nice aluminum alloy wheels. It has a little scrape here on the bumper or the rear quarter here. You come around to the back, it's just your typical Buick type of styling, nothing fancy, nothing out of this world. And the rest is equally in decent condition. So before we dive in, also I wanted to go over something that I've learned over the years as a shop owner. And I want to give you guys some advice of those of you taking your car or truck to a shop. You need to be careful about trying to tell the shop what you think is wrong with your car. It could help you, it could also severely hurt you. Because if there's a shop out there that's not very honest or not very up and up on dealings with people, the customers, they may take what you said and said, okay, I'm going to charge you for that and do the little fix. It was only going to be 20 bucks, but since you said you thought you knew what it was, I'm going to charge you the 500 bucks. You can also get a hold of an inexperienced shop owner or mechanic who just kind of goes with the flow. Oh, you think this and this is wrong? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and try that. And then it fixes nothing. You just wasted your time, your money, and the shop has wasted their time as well. Now, no offense to this owner. They really thought they kind of understand what's going on with this car. But it came in with some complaints. It has some oil leaking. And then it has low voltage to the gas tank fuel pump is what they think it is. And possible O2 sensors or exhaust leak. After we did some checks, what we found was wrong, had nothing to do with the rear fuel pump. Now you have to remember with direct injection vehicles, there are two fuel pumps. A lot of us get it stuck in our head, there's one inside the fuel tank and that's it, right? Wrong. There's one in the fuel tank that operates about 60, 70, 80 psi, usually on direct injection vehicles. It does not go to the injectors. It goes to the high pressure fuel pump, which is usually ran off the camshaft, which boosts up to thousands of psi. A fuel pump in your tank is not going to be able to provide thousands of psi of pressure. So getting an error, like I want to show you this picture here, it shows a list of the codes. It's having some fuel issues, the fuel pressure regulator issues, and a few other things going on. We use the scan tool to look at data, look at fuel pressure going from the high pressure pump to the rail, and also we used a manual pressure gauge to check fuel pressure from the pump in the back. The fuel tank in the back has full voltage and it runs fine. It puts out 75, roughly somewhere around in there psi, good flow, good pressure, it never stopped giving fuel or pressure. So it has, from here back, that's not even going to be on our radar anymore. It has nothing to do with the fuel pump that's in the tank back there. But if we just go off of this, what the customer said, we would think we need a new tank fuel pump. But we don't. There were lots of codes. I showed you a few of them here just a little bit ago, but let me show you 2 codes that really stood out and what we found and how these issues are common across a lot of the models I just listed at the beginning of this video. One code that we got was P0014, and that's definitely something to do with the camshaft solenoid, the exhaust to be exact. There's a little solenoid that operates oil pressure to change the cam timing. Those can go bad. One common issue we see a lot on these 2.4s is people don't keep up with the oil changes. The oil gets either low, runs out of oil, or it's very dirty and very contaminated. It ends up damaging the solenoids. So on that P0014 code, I'll go ahead, I have several pages here. So you can see, replace cam actuator solenoid, 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 tons of solenoids. But wait, there's more. There's this other page over here. A whole list of solenoids. But wait, there's more. A whole other list of solenoids again. There's 4 pages listed of the camshaft solenoid for the exhaust side having failed, usually due to oil change issues. Before we dive into the fuel side of the issues, let's take a look at that cam solenoid. It's actually removed. So here's where the 2 solenoids reside, intake and the exhaust. You can see that the exhaust is removed. And you can see there's an oil leak down in there. It was leaking oil pretty bad. We think it was the oil leak that they're complaining about. But since this one is removed, let's take a look and see what we found. So here's the old exhaust cam actuator solenoid. And if you look closely, what do you see there? Tons of debris. Lots and lots of debris. These have a high failure rate because of debris, poor oil changes, and they're not very robust and very well made anyways. And with that paperwork I just showed you, it had 4 pages of those being bad. I don't have hundreds and thousands of Veronas in the shop at any given time. But what that paperwork shows from Identifix is hundreds or thousands of Veranos across the country. Multiple mechanics had the same issue. This is what they found. That was the guaranteed fix. And what we do is take that data and then double verify. We go say, this is what they're showing is really a high failure rate item. Is that what we're seeing here? And that helps us focus with all the other problems it could be. It helps us narrow it down to a little bubble of issues, possible scenarios. And using that, we get in there and test those items, and we found, just like you saw, the debris all over the screen on this thing. So that very likely took out that solenoid, which is giving the timing codes. So there were 2 separate issues going on here. We had the issue with the exhaust cam solenoid causing timing codes, and then we also had fuel pressure codes, pressure regulator codes, which is an electronic part that's part of the high pressure pump. One of those codes is P0089 and a P228C. When we type in that code, let me show you what we found there. So we see replace high pressure fuel pump, and we flip it over to the next page. Nothing but high pressure fuel pumps for that code, tons of them. So that helps us narrow where to look. So we looked at data while this engine was running using a scan tool. We have an Autel MS906 that we use for quick jobs, and we monitored what it wanted it to be as far as the pressure versus what it actually was. And it had the fuel pressure regulator wide open, trying to get the pressure up. It just wasn't getting there. We knew right away, looking at the data and also the high failure rate of items we saw using Identifix, we kind of put 2 and 2 together and say, there it is. Let's take a look at where this thing resides, how it works, and a couple other failure items that is here as well. So we're on the back of the engine, the back of the intake camshaft. It's actually used to run the high pressure fuel pump, the rotating motion. We see this line coming in here. This comes from our in-tank fuel pump that we talked about. But as you can see, it doesn't go to the fuel injectors. Oh no. it goes to the high pressure fuel pump, which then boosts that pressure up even higher and uses this steel line and takes the pressure over to the fuel rail down here. Now the pressure going into the pump can use steel braided line. It's only, like I said, 70 psi roughly. But from the high pressure pump to the rail can't really be very flexible. That's why it's this hard steel line. And they're not reusable. You have to put a new one on when you take them off because of the way they seal with this little ball tip here. I'm going to take off the old high pressure pump and show you what it looks like. Here we are. You can see the cam pushes on this plunger here and pumps the pressure up to really high pressures. And that code we were seeing with fuel pressure regulator failure is this electrical part right here that's part of this unit. You can't just replace this. You have to buy this whole unit here. But this fuel comes in here from the tank pump, and this is the second pump that takes it up to even higher pressure. Another thing that helped us to decide that definitely what was wrong here is when the engine was cold, it was loud, like tack, 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 tack. And you could put, or have a stethoscope I use, and it was coming from this pump. So something's wrong inside of this pump, definitely. It was loud. There's another piece to this puzzle that's a high failure rated item as well that can fail, even though the pump has not failed, but cause it to have low fuel pressure. It's this little roller lifter. You can see the roller has scores already in it. It's pretty deep scoring. I can feel it with my nail. And it goes on to right here. And it rolls on the camshaft. The camshaft spins and pushes this thing in and out. These go bad as well. So it's a common misconception, my high pressure fuel pump is bad. Why am I seeing on my list a fuel line and a lifter and all this stuff? We're not going to put your old stuff back on. We can't. Because you know for sure, as soon as you leave here 3 months from now, this little guy is going to let go. And the question will be, I thought we had this fixed. We will have it fixed when it leaves because all those parts are being replaced. So it's not a very big tear down. There's not a ton of labor involved. There was quite a bit to figure out what's wrong, and then some labor to replace the parts. But these aren't high labor items, but the price of the parts are pretty high. You got the little roller lifter, you got the high pressure steel line, and there's a gasket, and then there's the actual high pressure pump assembly. And we had this cam actuator solenoid. All these parts are tallying up really fast. Just these parts I've showed you right here are almost $1,000. Just for the parts, not the labor, not the diagnosis, just the parts. So if you're trying to save money, just replace one piece or one part, just the pump only, and then something else fails, you have to take it back apart, you have to get a new gasket all over again, new pieces, another one of these, a second time, or maybe this is the third time. Just do it all at once and get it all done, and everybody's happy, and you don't hear from that problem again for a long time. So it's easy to think it could have been a valve cover gasket causing the oil leak. It was coming from that area, but it ended up being the actual actuator itself. Not only was failed, but it was leaking pretty bad. One thing we're definitely going to do on top of all the repairs we just showed you is an engine oil flush. We're going to clean out all these debris and garbage, put fresh oil in it, and then inform the customer you really need to stay on top of the oil changes. And maybe they do, maybe they're a little bit longer than normal. But one thing we're learning with newer cars, with very finicky turbos, direct injection systems, oil controlled variable cam timing, all kinds of very finicky parts, they do not tolerate skipping oil changes. They start failing really fast when you start skipping oil changes. Like, I'm at 5,000 miles, I can go to 9. No, you probably shouldn't. I tell every customer that comes in, 5,000 max, do not exceed it. Every 5,000 miles, do an oil change. You can also go by time. A lot of times you'll see a sticker, an oil change sticker, it'll see 5,000 miles or 5 months. I would say probably if you don't drive at a few hundred miles a year, probably once a year would be fine, because the oil's not getting contaminated. But after the year has passed, you should go get an oil change. But 5,000 miles, 5 or 6 months, somewhere around in there, if you drive the car a lot, you should be doing oil changes. The oil in here is pretty dark and it has debris in it, unfortunately. In the years when Mrs. Wizard was still teaching, she had multiple different vehicles, Jaguar, Mercedes, Land Rovers, all kinds of different vehicles. And we lived quite a ways away from where she worked, so the miles racked up really fast. It seemed like every time we turned around, it was time for another oil change, time for another oil change. It was getting kind of annoying at times, but we still made sure they were done. And because we stayed on top of the oil changes, we rarely had any internal trouble out of any of the vehicles that we owned. A lot of people like to bash a lot of those cars. They break all the time. They actually are pretty good as long as you keep up on the maintenance. I had a customer years ago who would bring his vehicle in for an oil change and be angry. And he'd say, my wife says it's time for an oil change again. I didn't think it was that close. I just didn't pay attention. The miles are racking up pretty fast. And he'd actually get mad. I think if it wasn't for his wife, he would skip the oil changes and say, screw it, I don't have time for this. And that's really a bad idea, especially with modern cars, like I mentioned here a little bit earlier. They are more complex, tons of cheap plastic parts. They will not tolerate skipped oil changes. Okay. Just remember, of all those vehicles I listed at the beginning of the video, it has this 2.4 Ecotech. Make sure you're doing oil changes. And if you're having some of these issues we talked about, you can have an idea of possibly what you might be looking into with the repairs. If you're curious what kind of tools we use to work on this or any other car in the shop, check our Amazon affiliates link in the description below. We get a small cut. If you purchase anything there, really appreciate it. Make sure to hit the subscribe button because there's so many more cool videos to come. Thanks for watching.